While Adventures in the Forgotten Realms isn't strictly a core set, like a core set, it has been clearly designed with care and attention to appeal not just to Magic players, but D&D players and the larger fantasy fanbase. And as it also takes the core set slot this year, we wanted to take a look at how MTG D&D may have changed the way we look at introductory sets. Welcome to Magic the Flavouring, the Magic the Gathering podcast, where we talk about all things Magic, flavour design and lore. I'm your host, Andy Mann.
Hello, this is Nathan Cancel.
And today we're going to start talking about Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, for realsies this time, not just hyping up other bits and bobs. The images for the card gallery are still being released. The cards, which will then be images on a card gallery, are currently being released because we're in spoiler season for MTG D&D. So we're not going to talk about the flavour on the cards just yet. We're going to be talking about something a bit broader and talk about how the fact that this set is kind of a replacement for this year's core set. This is something you wanted to talk about, Nathan.
Yeah.
So we will get into all that. This is going to be more of a broad Magic the Gathering sort of aesthetic and philosophy episode, I guess, rather than talking just specifically about D&D, but because this is a big shake-up for Magic. Before we get straight into that, though, I want to acknowledge a mistake in our last episode. We've spoken about it on Twitter. We spoke about the artist Elliot Mitchell, and we used the incorrect pronouns when talking about Elliot Mitchell. Mitchell is non-binary. They use they and them pronouns, and they are Rebecca Gay's child. These are not the pronouns or gender identifiers that we use when talking about them. The episode has since been taken down, re-edited, so all the improper pronoun usage has been taken out, and we have also put a disclaimer, very similar to what I just said, at the start of the last episode. So if you listen to that episode and you didn't hear our disclaimer, this is us correcting our mistake now. Not only are we very sorry to Elliot Mitchell, we do apologise. We also apologise to anyone that was let down by our mistake. We do apologise, and we will endeavour to do better.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right, let's talk about Magic D&D. Core sets. I love a core set.
I love a core set.
Yeah.
But my big statement here is, have wizards finally gone too far? Question mark, exclamation mark, question mark. And this is funny, right? Because I said this to you earlier, because we obviously have a little preamble discussion about these things, about how I had quite a restless night. Like the night where you go to bed early and you constantly wake up from crazy ass dreams, and I get hit with inspirations of like how I'm going to engage in this conversation. And this was like the best one I could come up with was have wizards finally gone too far? The point being, like, this set is taking the place of a core set, right? And there is a massive, massive notable difference between Adventures in the Forgotten Realms and, say, M20 or M19. Or if we think about it, the very, very the origins of core sets, in terms of being like reprint sets, like 5th edition, 7th edition, 10th edition, for example, being the last one I think that was pure reprints before they started doing new cards as well as like majority reprints. And then I don't think Adventures in the Forgotten Realms has many at all. I think there's one or two. I know that there was the sleep card. There's a blue sleep card that's a reprint. Beyond that, I think you'll be hard pressed to find many reprints in this set at all. Which, compared to what core sets used to be like, is completely divorced from the original ethos. And it's funny that as an introductory set, right? This is the whole point about core sets, was like the introductory basic beginner set. This is as far from that in terms of like, hey, would you want an easy set to get into Magic with, as it could possibly be. So I think it's maybe worth conversing about what a core set maybe means, what the other ones were like, whether or not we felt they were going in the right direction in terms of adding bits of flavour. Maybe this is how we're going to be seeing core sets going forwards. Maybe this is how we're going to see other adventures in Forgotten Realms and with different IPs going forwards. That's the kind of discussion that I was feeling that we could be having today.
That is a very interesting starting position for you to take versus what I feel about this situation. So for those listening, this episode was very much something that we were like, right, we want to record this week. The full set hasn't been spoiled yet. What we're going to talk about. And Nathan, you were like, oh, I have this big idea about core sets. And I was like, cool, I've got some ideas. We really didn't talk much about it. It's interesting that you say that you feel like this set is so far removed from that ethos, because I think I agree with you in terms of its mechanics, right? And because of what, and we'll talk about what core sets were and what they were designed to do, and there have been changes over the years, which I think will support the D&D version of this core set a bit more and kind of give it a bit more kind of context. But I feel that with Dungeons and Dragons, it is fulfilling the bringing in new players factor. It's just not necessarily doing it from gameplay in terms of magic keywords and simple interaction. It's instead trying to do it through a blending of IP and packing lots of narrative flavor that people can grip onto, that then translates really flavorfully into what the cards are actually doing. And having that narrative on the cards along with what they do is actually perhaps more intuitive than just having a keyword that has little context. So yeah,
Interesting.
interesting. Yeah. Oh, I like this. This is going to be a good episode. All right, so tell you what, mate. That's kind of my starting point. Take us away, and then we'll see where we go.
Cool. So my first question was, and it's like glad that you brought it up, because this is like one of my first points. As an introductory set, who is this introducing? Like, for my questions is for who, to what? Because there are two different directions, right? With this set, you've got Magic players being introduced to D&D characters, mechanics, settings, which questionably could seem to be a little lost in the subtleties or the magnitude of the D&D-ness of the set. This is the thing, this set is not holding back on how much of a D&D set it's going to be. Like, every single card has either throwbacks to specific abilities, specific magic spells, specific characters, specific settings, all of this nonsense. Or is it someone seeing a D&D player coming across to Magic? And in this regard, I think probably the appeal is greater, I think, for D&D players coming into Magic than it is maybe for, say, Magic players wanting to play D&D. And my main point for this is, what is the bar in either direction, right? What stops a D&D player already playing Magic, or what stops a Magic player getting engaged with D&D? Or why was there a separation of these two different fandoms? Because for someone like myself or yourself, we've both dabbled in D&D. We're definitely much more in the Magic side of things, so we can really appreciate what this set's kind of doing, but we might not necessarily be so fully invested that we see certain characters and go, "Oh my god, I can't believe they got him in." Like, for example, when I saw scroll. When I saw Xanathar, for example, I was more excited about it being another thief and theft commander than I was it necessarily being like, "Oh my god, Xanathar, the Guild King." And then, don't get me wrong, I did some research into him. This is something we'll talk about in our Flavour episodes, of where we kind of go deep on a few of the characters and kind of the nuance in the artworks and stuff like that. But Xanathar, again, wasn't necessarily an appeal to me of seeing a character that I've known already. It was more seeing mechanics, playing him, and then maybe that makes me want to go and look up the character a bit more, because I've got more of a Magic basis than a D&D basis. But then, yeah, that question for me was, as an introductory set, what is this more leaning towards? Is this leaning more towards Magic players becoming more akin to D&D mechanics and that whole world, and then wanting to go and invest into that further? Or was it a set deliberately trying to pull D&D players into the game? Well, because the game mechanics for Magic aren't hugely complicated for those that play role-playing games, or say play other complicated board games. Like, once you get into it, Magic is the most complicated card game, but it's not the most complicated game by a long stretch. And coming down and playing with our kind of mechanics, coming from a gaming background that might have more dense mechanics and more wide lore, and you have to be more invested in the story and the nuances between everything and all the different abilities, it's probably not too difficult to pick up. I specifically know this to be true because about 2 months ago, I introduced a bunch of D&D players to Magic, and they did the typical Magic thing as when you start up, where you buy a box of this, a box of that, all of these cards, you throw them all together, and then you spend like 3 weeks going, "Oh my god, this is the best game ever! I'm so addicted!" Yum 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 yum. So I feel like maybe this set isn't necessarily a way to reintroduce players back into the game of Magic, which like original core sets maybe were supposed to be doing, almost like a restart or like a foundation set, as it were. Whereas this doesn't necessarily feel like a foundation set for Magic players. It feels like a foundation set for D&D players, and then introducing all of the Magic mechanics, to them, and going like, look, this is another game that can play around with a similar design space, maybe a similar world view. Obviously, this is a very specific set, right? This is very much a D&D themed set. But if you then look at Chandelier, or if you were to look at maybe even like, say, Eldraine, what was the other one? There was another set that was very D&D. Zendikar, right, with the party mechanic and the clerics and all that nonsense. Like, maybe this is a good platform for them to look at other sets and go, oh, okay, there are other hints of our game and other stylistic equivalences. Obviously, both products are owned by Wizards of the Coast, right? So this was my big question at the beginning of who is this set for, or who is this trying to engage with which game more? And I think realistically, it's trying to catch the D&D nerds and going, hey, look, here's another product that we make. Here's another game that you could be playing that plays on a slightly different axis. It's more, okay, D&D is turn based, right? But it's more chess based rather than it is like say story driven.
Well, it's a card game versus
So
an RPG.
that was my
like that's really all like it is.
yeah,
And
exactly.
so okay, so all right, there's a lot to unpack there. Straight off the bat, I think that if you're just talking about if you're a D&D player and not a Magic player, or if you're a Magic player but not a D&D player, I actually think they've pitched it very well centered. I actually don't necessarily think my gut was to say this is for D&D players to pivot them into Magic the Gathering, because Wizards of the Coast know that selling a billion packs of Magic cards, that people will still buy old packs of Magic cards forever and ever and ever, whereas for D&D, I mean, this is me talking knowing very little actually about the economy of D&D. I know that source books and like guides and things can be released ad nauseum, and they do cost like 30 quid a pop, and then you have things like D&D Beyond, which you still have to pay for and things like that. But I think the sort of constant revenue stream for Magic is potentially more abusable by people like Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast. So to bring Dungeons and Dragons players into Magic is probably the money spinner that they want to go for. But creatively, like, I think they pitched it very well. This is obviously a little bit biased because we're Vorthos, right? So
Yeah.
the hook for Magic players to be invested in the D&D set seems to rest a lot on the kind of narrative and the flavor of a lot of these cards and how they're presented. So for us, this is like Christmas, because when you say like, you were more interested in Xanathar mechanically, but then obviously you did do a little bit of research. Well, that's exactly it. That's exactly what they want. So, for example, before this set came out, I had no idea who Tiamat was. Now I know through just chatting to other people who play Magic or listening to a couple of other podcasts. I know that Tiamat is one of two main dragon gods and is the evil one. And just through knowing that, I now know that one of the new Planeswalkers that was spoiled, who doesn't have the name in the title, but has the name in the Planeswalker type line of Bahamut, is the other dragon god. But they're not a dragon on their Planeswalker card. They're a monk, and they have a bunch of monk tribal, but then they have a static ability that also turns them into a dragon. And out of context, and even me trying to explain it, this doesn't mean much. And I don't know anything about Bahamut other than they're the more good dragon god, sort of. But the fact that they're a humanoid on their card that turns into a dragon already tells me so much more about this character than I would have ever have known before this set came out, and gives me all of the flavor that I need to kind of keep playing forwards without knowing really any of the deep lore of Dungeons and Dragons. So I think there was a worry for a lot of people that when a lot of these characters got released, like Winters got released and Tiamat and all this kind of stuff on the early spoilers, there were a lot of Magic players being like, do I have to fucking like learn a whole new world? And like, even just knowing that things like Faerun and the Forgotten Realms are only, they are like, oh, they're the big things in like Dungeons and Dragons. They're not even like a fucking percentage of the entirety of the D&D lore world. Like, there are so many other things going on that it's like the first time you play Skyrim. You have no fucking idea what's going on, but then you kind of you learn and you kind of dig deeper in this, that, and the other. But I think they've nailed it so hard to the wall with just the straight up flavor on these cards that you only need to put your first foot into the dungeon, and then suddenly you can kind of see it spread out before you and kind of go, oh right, I do get it, I do understand it. So that's from Magic to D&D. From D&D to Magic, I think that obviously D&D and Magic players are very aware of each other because of Wizards of the Coast, and it's the same company, so they share artists, they share designers, they share like creative space in the building and whatever. So I think there are a lot of D&D players who maybe would be enticed by the idea of like, well, we've always wanted to play Magic, but again, it's like, do we have to learn this whole new thing? And now the fact that they've got these cards that can kind of introduce them to the game, then that's how they get in. And I think that's fairly cut and dry. That is fairly obvious, like door in for D&D players. If we're not talking about Magic and D&D players, I would argue that Dungeons and Dragons is a far more recognized worldwide property than Magic the Gathering. Lots of people know about Magic the Gathering, and actually far more than I give credit for. When I say I play Magic, far more people than I would think would go, oh yeah, that's like the fantasy card game. But the way it's always described, and I've described it like this, and I'm sure you have too, is that it's like it's like D&D meets poker, right? I know I've used that analogy before.
Mm.
So I think that this is a good way to introduce people to Magic the Gathering, because if you're saying to someone, do you like Dungeons and Dragons, but you're not really sure about doing all the improvisational storytelling stuff because that's daunting to people, or if you like the idea of high fantasy, well, there's a Dungeons and Dragons, but they've got like a card game set of it now that's also for this other card game. I think you're going to catch a lot of people in this moment who really vibe with the aesthetic. It's like when Ravnica came out, Return to Ravnica in 2012. I know I keep using this as like the spot test because this is when I came into the game in a big way, but
Mm.
it was like the second renaissance of Magic. It was the set which brought in all of like the newer generation of players. Well, I say brought in my generation of players, and then like more recent sets like Eldraine brought in like another new sort of set with Arena. But that was only because people vibed with Ravnica so much harder than they did with sets that were previous. Like it could have happened at different times. Like Innistrad also had, because that was in the same standard, also sort of contributed to that because it was a very recognizable world. And I sort of feel like I don't know who this was for initially, but I kind of feel like they've pitched it really well that it is just a very solid way to bring in new players for everyone.
Mm.
That's kind of how I feel about it.
No, that's fair. I mean, I like your point about talking about like Drizzt and people like that. Like, look at is it 20, yeah, M19 for example.
Mm.
For the old school players that didn't necessarily read the story and only saw the cards being spoiled, when they saw Chromium the Mutable and they go, oh shit, and he even turns into a human. Oh, that's just like in the story. Now, what's the difference between that and someone who doesn't know D&D having to look up Xanathar? You know, if there's a newer player, you don't know who the fuck Chromium is. You have to go and look it up. It's probably actually harder to find out the exactities about Chromium without, you know, just MTG Wiki or whatever.
Yeah, but how would you even know to look there? This
You
is
know
what
what
I'm
I
saying.
mean?
Like, yeah, we're as I say, we're biased because we're Vorthos. So this is like second nature for us to like look this shit up because we put stock in it. There are the majority of Magic players. The majority of Magic players are like aren't anywhere near as invested in the lore. Like even some like the bigger like YouTube channels. Like I mean, one of the reasons we started this podcast is because we were watching a big YouTuber and they kind of didn't know what the lore was on a very prominent character, and we were like, oh, that's kind of a shame. Like they're obviously focused on gameplay, but all right, let's talk about the characters then. That was our kind of whole start. So yeah, you're right. There isn't much difference. You ask most Magic players about the deep, deep niche, wanky lore of Magic the Gathering, and quite rightly, they've probably had better things to do with their time, like
Yeah.
deck building or playing the game. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, like you're right. There isn't much difference. So I don't think it is that much more work. I just think people have to maybe not be as intimidated because it is such a huge non-Magic world to kind of incorporate into the game.
Yeah, I think the flip side is that if there are those that are kind of automatically having a knee-jerk reaction because the set is quite dense, and I don't think that's a falsity to say. I think it's very obviously a very dense set. You've got everything from class enchantments to ability keywords that aren't technically ability keywords. You've got dungeon venturing. You've got cards that have a lot of text. Like the average text on a card, I know we've been saying this for a few sets now. Like the average text on a card is increased. It's a lot higher. So I can understand why there might be some immediate kickback, because for those that are used to a Magic set, or especially a core set, feeling a very certain way, despite, and this is a whole other point, despite probably complaining about how simple core sets are and how forgettable they might be, and yes, they've gone a long way to making core sets over the last couple of years a bit more interesting, right? Like they've almost flipped it the other way, where there's quite a lot of cards here that are quite difficult to grok, right? You have to like read them a few times to go, oh okay, right, that's what that's doing. And so maybe in that case, when they add in all of these ability keywords that aren't actually ability keywords, just almost like flavor keywords, right? Maybe that's probably a better idea for a set like this that gives one a bit more flavor for those that play D&D. So it's like, you know, the ability, say, siege monster, or even like whirlwind, like almost like to explain the effect. And it's almost like hand gifting you the flavor, right? You don't have to go like, oh, what is that representing on the card if it taps down the creature, or what was it representing on the card if it bounces it back to your hand? It's like, no, it even says it here. Like, this creature whirlwind bounces it back to your hand. And again,
100%.
we will talk about this a lot more when we talk about the set prop and we talk about individual cards, but arguably some people find that more clunky, and it's like, oh, it's too much extra text on the card. And I'm like, as someone who's a Vorthos, I'm like, I don't know. That's like adding extra colors to a card without having to write extra colors.
Do you know who thinks that? Because they're the people that we're talking to about this. Magic players think that. Because
Yes.
Magic players already have an inherent understanding as to what these things do. So if you look at something like I've got the card gallery for the cards that have already been spoiled up in front of me. You hear something on watch, 1 and a white instant, and it's choose one, rouse the party. Creatures you control get +1/+1 till end of turn, or set off the traps. This spell deals 5 damage to target attacking creature. In any other set in Magic, rouse the party and set off the traps wouldn't be words. They're not on any
Mm.
other card as far as I can see. I mean, I haven't looked at every single card, so I do apologize. But I think they are just on this card. Now, to a Magic player, that's just wasted fucking space. In a different episode, we would have said, why wouldn't they put flavor text on this? They've used up 2 times, like they've used up 2 lines of text to put that on there. Where's the flavor text? But because this is the D&D set, and they want to evoke D&D, and they've done it in all the names. Like, you hear something on watch is the clunkiest fucking name for a Magic card, but it fits because that's what the Dungeon Master is saying to their players, and this is the effect that we've got. And any other set, this card would just have creatures you control get +1/+1 to end of turn, or the spell deals 5 damage to target attacking creature. And you don't need to worry about the flavor of it. But to people who aren't Magic players, this is the perfect card to be like, oh yeah, this card buffs your team. What do you mean buffs my team? Well, it rouses the party.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes things bigger and better. Set off the traps. So you've set some traps down in the flavor of this card, and it's dealt damage to the creatures that are coming to attack you. Oh yeah, I kind of understand that. And then when they see this card again, but without those words on it in a different form, like other white spells that do something similar, they understand the what it's trying to say. And this actually, funnily enough, in the card gallery, it's this Scryfall I'm using. It's next to White Dragon, which is 4 white for a 4/4 white dragon creature that has flying. No other text attached to flying, because flying and a lot of the evergreen keywords and the kind of keywords that we see again and again and again in core sets, pretty much the only kind of mechanics we see in most core sets, well, at least before Dominaria anyway, was just the keywords, because it was trying to teach people about the keywords. And those are very grokkable, as you put it. Like flying, what does flying mean? Well, if it has flying, it means it flies over the top of creatures that don't have flying or don't have reach. Oh, okay, I understand that, because the keywords are, generally speaking, quite intuitive. So it's just another way to have intuitive narrative on a card.
Mm.
That yeah, it's a lot of text, and it might seem intimidating to look at a Magic card, but what Magic card isn't intimidating to look at if you've never played Magic before?
Yeah,
I think it's
absolutely.
perfect. I think it's great. And there have been people, as you say, that are a bit like, well, it just doesn't seem to, like, what's the point? And it's like, well, if you can't see the point, this set's not for you. Like most
Yeah.
other core sets, there are some people, just core sets aren't for them because they think the meta is too simplistic or whatever. Like, and that's fine. There are other sets of Magic. Fuck me, are
Mm.
there other sets of Magic? Christ, they release 20 a year. You know.
Yeah, no, you've hit the nail on the head here, because there's literally another example of this. When you're ambushed on the road, which is a single white, and you have 2 choices: either to make a retreat, return a creature you control to its owner's hand, or stand and fight. Target creature gets +1/+3 until end of turn. In Kaladesh, it was literally this exact same card: Ally Evasion, single white. Choose one: either target creature you control gets +1/+2
Yeah.
until end of turn, or return target creature you control to its owner's hand. Both of them have flavor text as well, right? This isn't even your ambushed on the road doesn't even take up the flavor text space. But you look at Ally Invasion, you're like, okay, so flavor text, sure. You know the law, but I know the streets. And you're like, okay, cool, but how does that give you a how does that give you a buff? And then I get like the return into your hands, like, because I know the back alley and I escape or whatever. And it's like, well, it even explains it better within the card, right? It gives you the make a retreat or stand and fight. Almost like it almost justifies the 2 abilities better than say Ally Evasion does. So I don't think necessarily it takes anything away. Again, with the whole more is more thing. And yeah, if you feel like it maybe is too much, too clunky, then again, yeah, maybe this isn't the flavor isn't hitting you. Maybe you're more of a male, and you're like, well, I don't need the extra words to explain the flavor. I don't need the mechanics to be more put in world, right? I just need to know what the card functions as. It does this or this thing. So yeah, I think again, it's the idea of who is this appealing to, and if it isn't necessarily appealing to you, why are you getting angry about it? I mean, I guess it's taking the place of a core set, right? This isn't like, if you don't like Innistrad and you're going, oh, got 2 Innistrad sets coming at the end of the year. Cool, fair enough. You didn't particularly like Innistrad. That's not too big a deal. Like, there are some people that off the back of Innistrad really didn't like Kaladesh because it was a massive change in pace. And so it made them go, oh, I'm just going to like duck out for a little bit. Cool. All that's saying is just how much you liked the Innistrad Magic set. It's not telling me that you don't like Kaladesh that much, is that you liked Innistrad so much that you just want the entire game to be that, which in my eyes, they've designed that set perfectly then if all you want is more and more and more of it. So yeah, I guess that the argument is is it taking anything away, really? I mean,
No.
again, you don't want it in every set all the time, because not only would it get very tired and very boring, but it deliberately plays into every action in D&D is set with a certain ability, or I can do this because of this, right? So I'm going to play dead. Well, how? Well, because I've got illusion, or I've got persuasion, or you have to justify it in your own way. And yeah, well, again, we'll talk about the choice cards, 'cause I think those are some of the best bits of flavor within this set, but we'll get onto that next week when we talk about cards specifically. It was just an interesting thing to think about, of like, it is, I say, a very, very dense set, and I think for both introductory Magic players and introductory D&D players, as long as you find that, as you say, that middle ground of where you're adding enough flavor justifications to the abilities to make those abilities not feel super intense, or maybe some of your rares and your mythics do have a few too many words on them, because once you've understand them, they make more sense, right? And they've been doing this anyway across Magic, across core sets, of where they've slowly but surely increased the difficulty in the cards, or at least the complexity on the cards. You don't get like the basic commons that don't do anything anymore. That's something they very much want to change. So every single common does something interesting, does something that is quote unquote irreplaceable, that changes the basis of your deck, because most limited formats are based on commons and uncommons. So if you don't have complexity all the way down, some decks can feel just like, play another 2/2, cool, what a game I'm playing right now. So yeah, again, I don't mind the over complexity of it. It was just something that I'd seen mentioned, and whether or not that pushes some players away or not, what set of Magic doesn't push some players away,
Well,
for
quite.
whatever reason?
I mean, it's funny people talking about the complexity of this set, and the kind of way that it's using things that maybe people wouldn't expect from a core set, or wouldn't want from a core set, because it's not an invalid argument, I don't think. It's just that so much of the complexity in this set is to do with flavor, and kind of the kind of enhanced mel aspects of like, oh well, you literally do the thing to do the thing. Even so far as like when they've brought dice rolling in, a lot of people, I mean, there's been a whole argument about the random number generation being like a core mechanic in a set is maybe something people aren't a big fan of, which is a slightly different argument, and I sort of see what they mean. But just things like, it's not complex so much as it is you're just rolling a dice, and you have a
There's
couple
more
of,
variation,
yeah, it's
right?
just variation, and it's not more complex. The ability just has a name now that evokes something. You will probably never say that name. What you'll do is, creature enters the battlefield, destroy target enchantment or artifact. Like, what do we do when we play EDH? We go, I'm going to Rex Age your Mirari's Wake. We don't even use the name of the card. We use the name of the card as the ability. We don't even play the name of the card, read the ability, and say, I'm going to blow up your thing. We just go, oh yeah, Rex Age that. It's like, it's not going to take anything away from your game
No.
to be like, oh, well, this creature has Mage Hand. Well, what does that mean? Oh, I tap it to untap target permanent not named Clever Conjurer. Activate only as a sorcery. This is on the card Clever Conjurer. Like, you would never say that. You would just go, I'm going to tap my Clever Conjurer to untap this. And you go, okay. Like, if you don't
Yeah.
want to engage with it, you don't have to.
Yeah, I think if anything, it makes abilities more resonant, right? Certain things, like I think with the Manticore or whatever, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, poison. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's like Poison Tail or something. When it ETBs, it destroys something that's been dealt damage. I'm like, well, yeah, that ability is fairly like cool. I've seen it plenty of times with other cards, but it feels way more evocative to be like, oh yeah, Manticore comes and goes, yeah, sting you. Like that feels more evocative. It feels more like what a core set should do, which is kind of explain the feeling of a game more, right? Like, again, most core sets end up feeling bland because they didn't add all these extra complexities to it. But if anything, a core set should deliver like a basic level of flavor, of basic fantasy flavor. And if D&D isn't like the bread and butter of basic fantasy flavor, I don't know what else you're eating.
Exactly. I mean, it's also worth noting that Adventures in the Forgotten Realms is explicitly not a core set either. It's taking up the space of a core set.
Yeah.
Which it is distinctive only in so much as it was originally designed to be the core set for this year, and then they decided to push the design of it further and make it a fully fledged set that just sat in this space. That's not to say I don't think that they weren't thinking about the fact that this is effectively the core set, but it did give them room in the design teams to be able to do these things and to have it just like not be set in Magic. It might have even been as simple as that. They're like, well, it's not set in the world of Magic, so it can't really be a core set because core sets are the core of Magic flavor and design. Like, so it inherently can't be a core set.
I was going to say there was an article that came out yesterday from Mark Rosewater, D&D-esign part one, where it kind of goes into this a little bit of how, like, what the intention of the set to begin with, and how it ended up developing. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, go and look it up, because it is, they do consider they don't just do these things in a vacuum and go, here's another set. They kind of go, okay, so what are we already working on? What's already selling well? What's already appealing to players? How can we flex that into things as well? So if you want to look into it, it does literally talk about that idea of how it compares against a normal core set and how the set developed. Basically, I don't think we're going to not see core sets again. Obviously, it just means they're going to have to really bigly, great, good. We're going to have to seriously consider how we go back to core sets after this, because again, it's not pretending to be a core set, but then going from a year where every set was very dense, do they then go, okay, maybe we need that exhalation period. We need the set that feels a little bit more back to basics to kind of give everyone a pause and time in between these more complicated expansion sets. You know, everything from like a Courier Eldraine, like all of these sets are very, very dense and have a lot of complexity, like the Wishboard lesson thing from Strixhaven. Like each set seems to have something else. Even D&D, even the Adventures in the Forgotten Realms has venturing and dungeons, which is its whole other mess of nonsense that we haven't even spoken about yet. So yeah, it's if you want to look at more about the ethos of how they built this set and how they consider it compared to core sets, look up the Mark Rosewater article, because it kind of goes into that a bit more.
Yeah, I'll put it in the description box below, actually. That's a very good point. Looking at core sets since they came back with M19, so you had M19, M20, and M21 have been the three core sets over the past 3 years, obviously. And they're the first core sets that were designed after the new sort of reshake about how all Magic sets were designed during Dominaria. So before Dominaria, it was a case of you had the sort of vision team and you had the development team, and they just kind of, there were two halves of the thing where people went, oh, this is the kind of like mood board of what we want, and then this is how we're actually going to put it on the cardboard. And that's how Magic sets were designed for a very long time. And then after Dominaria, they blended it all a lot more together, because what they found was it was two halves of the same coin that weren't really talking to each other. And so it felt like, well, some sets are very mechanical and some sets are super flavorful, but very rarely did the twain meet. You know, it was only in those like really sort of like special moments with things like Innistrad or Ravnica where things really kind of like came together.
Where you couldn't tell if it was top down or bottom up, right? You're
Yeah.
like, oh, which direction's it coming from? Whereas most sets these days, you can't tell.
It's really notable that these core sets that have come out since Dominaria, and since they brought back the idea of a core set, because obviously now this is the first year that they haven't done a core set for several years, so this is the second time now that they've kind of been them. But, you know, they might come back. They now have vision design handoff, and set design, and then play design. So they have all these different like little things, but they're all very like blend into each other. So the vision design, which would just usually have been the concept design in the early days, is now actually something that ends with the vision design team handing a complete file with mechanics and themes and everything off to the design team, with all the notes, with all the ideas of like, this is what we wanted to achieve, this is what we think the set should be, this is the set. We now need you to try and hit as near to this mark as you can. And they work so much more blended together. And then the set design team take what is essentially a completed Magic set, and they like, you know, sand it down, and they make sure that it actually works mechanically, and they kind of put it as like, this is how we can actually put things on cardboard, or that wording doesn't quite work, but this is what they wanted to achieve with that card, and so they change it that way. And then it goes into play design, where they actually play the cards because it's a game and you can't know how it's going to work until you play it. And obviously there are issues with play design and things of recent years, but let's not, you know, be assholes about it too much. Like, the new design system has created some of the most dynamic Magic sets ever.
Yeah, and they're also pushing that fire aspect, right, of where everything is supposed to be pushing the envelope. It's not supposed to be feeling pedestrian. Like, yeah, and you're going to have mistakes when you try and push the boat out a little bit more. Sometimes the boat sinks,
for sure. And it's just very telling that this idea of people sort of saying, well, this is an incredibly dense set, for better or for worse, and it's taking up the core set thing. So, and who's this set for? It's even what you said at the start of the episode. You're like this is maybe too far for a core set. And the reason I'm maybe a little bit hesitant to have agreed with that sort of initial statement is because if you look at, let's start with M19. So not only flavorfully, so this is kind of aside from the flavor of the cards. I mean, M19 this was the Nicobolas core set. So not only did they reintroduce core sets with like a lead character, which is something they carried forwards, we also got like a whole story arc written by Kate Elliott. Like, do you know what I
Mm.
mean? That accompanied the set. So
One of the
already,
better arcs as well.
yeah, already not a regular core set. And mechanically speaking, if you look through the card gallery of the set, Nicol Bolas the Ravager is a flip planeswalker from creature to planeswalker in a core set.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, fucking mad. And obviously, yeah, you have like your sort of simpler cards and some more like powerful ones or whatever else. Like, you have Titanic Growth is in this set, and Rabid Bite and things like that, Reclamation Sage. But to have a flip walker in a way that we've not seen flip walkers before, like I suppose we did have the one from Magic Origins, but just the I suppose so, right? Yeah, that's fine. But this is
Also weird. Also weirdly taking the place of a core set, right?
yes, also exactly. But this I suppose is because it's three colors is absolutely crazy. If we
Yeah.
then move forwards to M20, so M20 was the same year as the original Modern Horizons. I'm
Oh,
remembering.
don't ask me about timescales and things, man. I
The
barely
only
remember
reason I
last
think
week.
the only reason I think that is because when I just skimmed through this card gallery, I was thinking, I swear that was in the original Modern Horizons. But anyway, if we're just talking about the core sets, this core set had cards like Yarok the Desecrated, the
Oh, and Omnath, right? Yeah,
and
3-color Omnath.
Three Color Omnath, Risen Reef, like just looking
Yeah.
for like the new Kalia, Zenith Seeker, Kethis Hidden Hand, Kaikar. This is just the multicolored legends. Kaikar Wins Fury. You're telling me that that's not like these are core set cards in like what you
Mm.
thought, like what people think an old core set was. Like flavorfully, mechanically, these are pushed
Oh,
cards.
fucking Golos. It had Golos.
Had
Oh, shit.
Golos, Tireless Pilgrim. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Had a second Vivian Arkbow. Vivians and Ajanis seem to be all the way throughout the set. This was also the set that had 3 Chandras in it because it was following
Yeah.
the life of Chandra. Like, crazy, absolutely crazy. With Awakened Inferno doing with the +2 being each opponent gains an emblem with at the beginning of your upkeep. This emblem deals 1 damage to you. So we've got a
Mm.
planeswalker that has an emblem in it. First off, that's quite big for a core set. Secondly, it's one that you can repeatably get from the +2. Like, try telling a new player about that.
Yeah,
Like,
ley lines, shit like that as well. Like it's not. Yeah, they clearly had an uptick in terms of like, oh, what we can get away with putting on our rares. Like they had the Cavalier Cycle as well, which like word soup, keywords. Well, not keyword soup, but at least ability soup of having ETBs, leave the battlefield effects, that kind of thing. Like, yeah, there was a lot of even things like repeated reverberation. Like the cards that they released do have nuanced complexity. It's not so like, oh, you can read it and go, cool, easy, sorted. It's like, okay, it's that whole let me reread it a few times to kind of understand it.
And then M21 was coming up right up until like recently. Elder Gargaroth. Like, do I need to say more? That fucking
Yeah.
that card is word soup. And then you look at something like Lanoir Visionary, which is Lanoir. This is the card that we couldn't think of the other day. I was trying to say to you, it's like Elvish Visionary and Lanoir
3 of
Elves
them.
put together. Well,
Yeah.
that's Lanoir Tribe.
Oh right, so this is the set, right?
Lanoir, that's what we were saying. Lanoir Visionary is when Lanoir Visionary enters the battlefield, draw a card, which is Elvish Visionary with Lanoir Elves because it taps for a green, right? And
Sure.
it's a 2/2 for 3.
Yeah.
So they're not using these to reprint old cards. They're using them to revamp the game with old cards reprinted into one thing. I know that's a design space that actually some people are a little bit iffy about, is pushing 2 cards together. I quite like it. I think you're a bit against it, aren't you? You didn't
I
like
don't
it.
mind. I don't mind. It's when you get like the 3 Healers Hawks. Just put 3 Healers Hawks together. And that's a card. I'm like, cool, great. And it's like, oh, let's put Birds of Paradise and Ornithopter together. That's a card. I'm like, yeah, cool. Did you just keep chucking things together? It's like again, I made the joke about Yu-Gi-Oh! It's just polymerization. Like you can't give me actual polymerization. And no, don't give me shitty mutate. Actually, no, I take it back. Yeah, no, just be mutate, but worse. I take it back. Yeah, I take it back.
So, and also with M21, just to go from like a visual thing, this was also the set where it was the Teferi set, but really it was about the 5 planeswalkers, and each one of the planeswalkers got their own special frame with associated cards and basic lands, right? So whatever you think about the visuals, we've actually discussed ad nauseum about what we think about the visuals of these cards, like the basic lands especially. But there are cards that you could argue don't look like Magic cards in a core set, which is meant to be the most basic of all Magic. And I think basically what I'm getting at with like sort of just going like a flyby of these 3 different core sets is I think core sets have changed. I don't think that's a secret. And I think that they're not a space to just get in new players and strip the game back to its base elements so that people can kind of have a breather or get like sort of deck support for like standard decks that maybe just need a very solid 2/2 for 2 or something. I think what they're being used for now is a space where they don't have to tie themselves down to narrative theme and they don't have to tie themselves down to any like one top down mechanic. It's a space where they can kind of go, right, this is just going to be a magic set that is magic set A, and we're going to put Teferi over the top of it to sell some cards and give it some visuals, but really it's just whatever we want to do in this core set. And
Yeah.
they've used that space to go, well, how do we make a Dungeons and Dragons set? Well, it doesn't need to be tied down to the story of Magic. It's not going to interfere with other sets that are set in the Magic world. So we're just going to do whatever the fuck we can to really push the idea of a Dungeons and Dragons Magic set.
Yeah, I guess you could argue, like, 'cause there's a lot of, I'm looking at the same three sets, like 2019, 2020, and 2021. There was a lot of random legendaries and things like, that the Teferi set got Sabira in, where you wouldn't have otherwise had her available. We got, oh God, I'm scrolling too quick, too fast. Where were we? Kervek, for example. We got like throwback cards that don't necessarily have an option in anything other than ancillary sets. Obviously, now we're getting things like Modern Horizons, and we have things like Commander sets, and to be able to kind of give us some throwbacks. Gix when is my big question still. Gix when, because obviously now you lose another set where you could go and look into the lore or the history of traditional Magic, but we've done that so much recently that you're probably going to end up running out of characters, right? You're going to end up running out of space. You're going to run out of like, okay, just another Planeswalker set. If anything, this is kind of a good departure from that to kind of give us a breath to go back to core sets. Like this is almost like the breath from core sets when core sets are a breath from normal Magic, right? It's the breath from the breath from. So again, I don't necessarily know that if the invested players look at a core set and go, oh, well, I don't really care. It doesn't give us any development in terms of lore. It doesn't give us anything. I mean, you might give us the occasional really spicy card, like, say Fire Emancipation, of where they go, oh, what's the biggest red mythic we can make? Or, Sublime Epiphany, what's the bluest blue card we can make, which a traditional core set might be able to do. But if you look deeply into, like, the D&D set, like Adventures in Forgotten Realms, like, there are some seriously, like, of their color cards in this set. So I don't necessarily, as you say, think it's changing the ethos in terms of design space, even if it is maybe cranking up potential complexity, or just in general adding extra flavor or extra lines of text to cards. Like maybe that's not a bad thing for a set that needs to translate a whole other IP. Like maybe that's what you need. Converse to like, oh, let's have a Redux on a Magic set. It's like, no, let's have a what's the opposite of a Redux? What's the opposite of Redux? But you know what I mean. Like,
Double
let's
Ducks.
let's a double Ducks. Let's double Ducks a set, and maybe and that's what sells it better, right? If the D&D-ness of it kind of gives it almost brevity to be able to get away with being a bit more complex, being a little bit more, a little less intuitive, maybe. Because I mean, arguably as Magic players, I don't think much is outside of our typical intuition. Like we're used to weird, complicated mechanics. Commander is such a defining format for most Magic players these days, and every Commander game is impossibly difficult and complex to keep up with. They've got all these different mechanics interacting with each other. So I don't think the average Magic player really would struggle too much unless they're digging their heels in. Whereas I think you need that kind of added flavor to maybe pull the newer players in. Like there's nothing worse having a core set and people going, oh, cool, that's not very interesting, really, is it?
Well, that's why they got rid of them in the first place, because
Exactly.
they didn't sell, because people were like, well, why would I buy a booster pack where the best thing I'm going to get out of it is a 3-drop enchantment that boosts my creatures
or
for 1/1.
Gigantosaurus, cool, great, here's your Timmy cards. That's like, it felt like a Timmy set, right? Whereas now it feels more like a Vorthos set, or even like a Johnny set, because there's such weirdness kind of going on within them. But again, I think if anything, it's kind of expected that this is the way it was going to go. I don't know how much more or how many other people you could have focused on a core set taking the lead for, because you went Nicol Bolas, you went Chandra, you went Teferi. It's like, well, who would be the next one? And wouldn't by that point it'd be a bit too obvious, a bit too base, and a bit too done? Like again, maybe you needed this complete divorcing and complete change of pace to kind of reinvigorate the reinvigorating set.
Yeah. So to answer your question at the start of the episode, has this gone too far? No.
No, yeah, no, I don't think so either.
No, not at all. It's exactly where it needs to be if we were considering this to be a core set. Yeah.
I guess the other question then I had was off the back of this is, okay, this is maybe our first adventure. This is our first outing into different IPs. Do we feel like, because D&D is already such a dense IP and such a dense product and has such dense lore and everything, and they can afford to almost run out of space within the set to put all the shit they want to put in there. Like, I don't think we're getting a Demogorgon. I don't think we're getting a few other like prominent characters or beasts, like say that are in D&D that people might want to see, you know, their favorite action or whatever. Like I saw today, for
Well, yeah,
example,
I think. Sorry, I think some of those are going to be maybe then in the Stranger Things
yes, of
equivalent,
course. Well,
right?
that was the Demogorgon argument, of
Yeah.
course, which for better or worse, and that's a whole different conversation. Fuck, I forgot my point.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. All right, that's it. So, is it because D&D has such an amazing density of lore that the set can feel this this heavy? You know, like it does feel quite impermeable sometimes when you first look, when you open up the image gallery. Day by day, I was like, okay, cool, cool, cool. If you just look at it out of no, like having missed the last few weeks or whatever, it could feel like a lot to take in. I don't know if, say, like Lord of the Rings or Warhammer will have the same inherent flavor implication that will make the sets feel super heavy and super alienating maybe to the average Magic player who wants to feel alienated. Because if you're going into this going, oh, I'm expecting not to like this, yeah, you're going to find lots of shit that you won't like, because of course you will. It's a really dense set. Whereas if I don't necessarily know if future IP or crossover IP sets will have that same feeling, because I think they can lean massively into the D&D. It's their own property, right? They can lean into every aspect of it.
Yeah. Well, so Warhammer 40k. So the Warhammer set's only going to be commander sets, right? I actually had this almost exact conversation with someone on Twitter the other day, Dice Tray, our friend Dice Tray, where it's the Warhammer set is going to be commander decks. I think it's not going to be like a mainline set. I think the Lord of the Rings one may be a set. They have so many different announcements.
I think it is, because I think in terms of like world building, right, you have way more for a Lord of the Rings feels like a setting you can do the whole set for, whereas I don't know if 40k you can do like a whole fuck off.
Well, I mean, also
set.
like guns and grimdark and stuff.
Yeah,
It's just a bit too much.
yeah.
I mean, well, so like just in terms of the amount of lore for these IPs, like Games Workshop for their properties, it is dense. Warhammer 40k is dense. Like I've gone down wiki holes that have lasted hours and hours and hours on Warhammer 40k because I'm like I have a passing interest in the lore. I'm not really big into like war games like miniatures, but the lore of it, I'm like, oh, okay, I can see where this is going. And even I'm like, I'll spend hours and hours and hours, and I won't feel like I've learned a thing because I know that there's so much more out there. Lord of the Rings as well, like not to be a Tolkien nerd, but Lord of the Rings is a lot bigger than even just the books. So, like, you know, there is a lot of lore, and also we still don't quite know because is it Fantasy Flight? Oh, what's the card company? Final Fantasy? No. 1 second. Fantasy Flight. Sorry, it is Fantasy Flight. God, that fell out of my head then for a second. Fantasy Flight has the Lord of the Rings card game, which has like original artwork and stuff like that. Like Magali Villeneuve is a big artist in the Lord of the Rings card game. So people are maybe thinking that it is going to be more like the movie rights and like the likenesses of like Elijah Wood and stuff.
That's what I'm imagining, right?
Right. So it might be then more tied to the just like the lore of Middle Earth and the Third Age, which is when the Lord of the Rings films, books take place, right? But there is still a really dense lore there. I think it will be different and it will be trickier because it isn't Wizards of the Coast property. So I think that, yes, I think that will have an effect on it and how much they kind of really dive into it, because also the internal teams that they have just might not have the same affection for it, just on like a human level of going like, you know, they just might not like Warhammer as much as they do D&D, and it might affect things. They might bring in outside designers, who knows. I've softened hugely on the idea of Universes Beyond and other IPs in Magic. I think even on this podcast, like when it first got announced, I was wringing my hands and grinding my teeth about it, and now it's just like I really couldn't give a shit. Like in the most positive way possible. Bring it on. Fucking have whatever Mickey Mouse on a Magic card. I don't give a shit. Like if people want to play it, they can play it. I don't have to buy those cards and have to play those cards. It's not going to affect my Commander experience, certainly. Like I think I even said it might do when we had Chris and Gregory on. I was like, well, maybe if we had different decks and we had our Universes Beyond decks, or whatever. Now I honestly couldn't give a crap now.
Yeah.
And they would have to do something real drastic for me to care.
Right. This is the thing we've been saying. It's going to take something monumental for me to stop playing like Magic. I mean, it's not even just stop playing Magic, to avoid a set completely. Like, I think it's also funny that as someone who only plays a little bit, the amount of excitement that I saw for a card check for traps because I always
Mm.
play the rogue, and it's the action I do more than any other action. Or seeing 50 feet of rope. Like, again, for some people, they might be like, oh, who gives a flying fuck? I'm like, well, your average bit of equipment from a normal set is just an axe, right? Who gives a
Mm.
flying fuck about that? I remember all these times that I've done cool things with 50 feet of rope, and I've never known artifacts to have like three different like abilities that make sense to repel over a wall. We haven't seen wall specific mechanics since like early days of Magic, because who gives a shit about walls? But it's on the card because it makes flavor sense. It's that kind of thing that I feel like it will have the same effect to those that love Lord of the Rings or to love 40k, that are going to have those cards that go, oh shit, on a Magic card? Hell yeah,
Mm.
I'm in. And I feel like that's something that, again, I feel there's a strange, and not to call us out or anything, but there's a strange knee-jerk reaction to Magic players that feel like this is our game, get out of our game, only I understand my game. Dude, it's like the biggest card game in the world. If you can't get
Mhm.
over that already, then I feel like you don't have enough self-awareness, because this game is engaged with so many people that have their own private individual relationships with it. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago on our kind of on our personal stance kind of episode,
Mhm.
of where you can't take away my personal experience with this game, no matter what you do to try and do it, no matter how much you poo-poo it on the internet. I just will not give a shit about your opinion if I like it, and
Yeah.
if I love it. And if you want to shout out about how bad it is, I mean, there are certain aspects to the company that you can definitely get angry about. And Tolarian Community College does this very well, of pointing out the times that he's celebrating the game and then pointing out the times where he feels let down.
Mm.
And I don't know any of those things that come from a specific design or flavor perspective. It's usually from a business model perspective, right? Or
Or
when
like
they're
or like a real world issue like racism, or like
yes, exactly,
like
yeah,
not being inclusive. Yeah,
those kinds of things.
it's very rare. It's the thing which you try and not let dampen your experience of the game are other people shouting about the fact that it doesn't look like a Magic card, or they've ruined the meta of X, Y, and Z. It's like, cool, that is like sort of your opinion, man. Like, it's not going to affect like what I'm doing. And the Universes Beyond thing, if I didn't like Universes Beyond, I wouldn't engage with it. As it goes, I really fucking love this D&D set, and I'm very excited to
Mm,
talk about the flavor, because heads up, if people are expecting us to be talking about D&D flavor like we know about D&D, that's probably not how we're going to approach it in the coming weeks. I'm going to be approaching this as a Magic fan who's
mm.
really fucking excited to speak about cards like Zombie Ogre. Do you know what I mean? And what
Yeah.
that means just as a Magic card. Like, so yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, 'cause I think that my approach is going to be, I'm going to try and talk to a couple of folks that are D&D invested, and kind of just run the set by them and go, right, out of the set, what really pops to you as a new Magic player? What pops to you, and as someone who's invested in D&D, what pops to you? Because they might not be like first edition, like ingrained kind of players,
Mm,
but I mean, they'll at least have an idea and understanding of like, this name means something, or this name means something, or this is why this title doesn't have the in front of it, or this is why this is the character that this is representing, and maybe they shouldn't have been a fourth, or maybe they should have been a 12-12, or that kind of thing. Like, again, it's going to be very hard for us to have a proper an equal footing in both D&D and in Magic. We're going to be looking at this from the eyes of a Magic set, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea. We will try and include some D&D perspective, as it
oh,
were.
for sure. And also, again, we have played D&D for many hours. It's just
Yeah.
saying that you've played D&D for many hours is like sort of saying, oh yeah, I got wet once when a drop of water hit me. Like,
Yeah,
it's like,
exactly.
I went swimming because it was raining. Like, that's not quite how it works.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, cool. That's pretty much all I had. All I wanted to talk about. I don't think they've gone too far. I'm looking forward to them trying to go farther.
Oh,
I
cool.
think.
Well, thank you for making us talk about it for an hour. Then has it gone too
Hey,
far? I didn't really think that.
yeah. Well, no. This is the question, right? I don't like having answers. I like questions, because then you get a bit more debate, and who doesn't like a bit of debate?
Sure, very
Um,
sure. All right, guys. Well, thank you for tuning in. Obviously, the great thing about this set is that it is kind of uncharted territory for podcasts like this, because there will be so many conversations, and ones conversations we won't be having, but not feeling bad because we're not having them, because it's just there are so many things to talk about with these kind of Universes Beyond set and sets that aren't just Magic the Gathering. I will say I'm quite excited to get back into a set which has Magic, even though like this set it haven't been released yet. It's kind of made me appreciate the fact that I am really excited for Innistrad at the end of the year,
mm.
and that taking these little dips out of Magic the Gathering is kind of very good to take a break, but also highlights again why you do like the IPs that you do like, which is kind of cool. Other than that, Nathan, do you have anything else to say? What's going on
Right,
with you?
Do you know what's funny, right? Is that every time I think I've got to the point of where I have dreams about having final thoughts because there's been several episodes of where I've forgotten the thing I wanted to say, and I distinctly remember yesterday going like, "Oh my god, I have the best final thought ever," and I can't remember if it was actually conscious or if it was in a dream of where I dreamt that I had a great final thought. So I feel like my final thoughts are always going to be like meta narrative of my final thoughts and whether I can actually come up with one. Other than that, no, I'm enjoying life. There's Rick and Morty and there's Loki going on, and that's all I need in my life is series to tide me over. Series to tide me over, and they're both very spicy and cool. And obviously, I like the things that everyone else likes, and I converse with people on Reddit about it, and I have active engagement in Zeitgeist. Yeah.
I'm going to say that although I've not actually been to our LGS Rule Zero in London to play Magic in quite some time, because of lockdowns or whatever else, since lockdowns have been restricted this time around, I have been there for the past 2 Mondays. So we're recording this on a Tuesday, so this was last night and the week before, with my wife Holly, where we've got a little tipsy and played pool for like 7 hours. Like we just go there in the afternoon, sit down at a table, get the pound coins out, and because the LGS has a pool table upstairs, and we have the whole upstairs, so it's like it's more than COVID safe because it's literally only us that's upstairs at that time of day, and we just play hours and hours of pool. It's become a little ritual. So big shout out to Gavin Tim at Rule Zero. Thanks for putting up with us as we're terrible at pool.
I think I'm going to be going there Thursday for actuals. I'm going to be meeting some people that I've played all year and a half with. As a guy, a shout out to Phil, because I have no idea what the fuck this guy looks like, and I've played so many hours of Magic with him that it's actually been really nice.
On spell table,
I actually get to meet him in person this week, so that's a nice.
I've definitely played more Magic with Phil on spell table than I have in real life. I have had the pleasure of playing face to face Magic with Phil. So yeah, it's gonna be fun times getting to play Magic with people like in person again.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Should be good fun.
Nice one. Well, guys, you can reach out to us on Twitter at mtflavouring. My personal Twitter is at AndyManface. Nathan's, yours is
at the Fox in the Moon.
Emails go to mtflavouring@gmail.com. All that remains for me to say, guys, is thank you so much for listening. This has been Magic the Flavouring.
We'll see you soon.